Hi, how are you all? You okay? You don't look too bad, actually. Yeah, you're looking okay. Well done for surviving days 1 and 2. So here we are. This is our deeper dive day. So as we've explained, yesterday was a day about discovery, random connections, getting the big picture. So our focus today is about looking in more detail at some of these good practices, understanding some of the mechanisms, some of the methodologies, some of the issues related to transfer. If you Google good practice in cities, you will not be short of results. There are literally millions, gazillions of results. So the issue isn't about good practices. The question is more about why is it not easier? Why do we not see more transfer going on between cities? And as a program for URBACT, we are interested in good practices, of course, but ultimately we are interested in cities doing things better. So we are in the business of practice. We're in the business of supporting cities to tackle chronic problems more effectively. So for us, your fantastic 97 good practices are just a starting point. Because really what we are aiming to do is to look at spreading those good practices and shifting good ways of working from cities across Europe. So this session is going to focus on the business of transfer. It's going to focus on the transfer networks. As you know, we have a call which is open currently. It's open until mid-January. It's an unusual call for us because it's a closed call. It's only open to a select band of cities. The 97 of you who are wearing green lanyards in this room, you are the only ones who are eligible to lead one of these networks. That's unusual. Normally we have an open call and we don't really know who's going to apply, how many. So for us, in some ways that makes life easier. And also it means we can have more of a dialogue with people who are thinking about submitting proposals. So just to in this session this morning, there's 2 parts to the conversation. In the first part, we're going to talk about good practice. We ran some pilots to help us understand some of the issues, some of the mechanisms. We wanted to check some assumptions. So we ran some pilots, and some of the participant cities in those pilots are here today. So we're going to have a conversation with them to talk about what did we learn, what did you learn, what was the experience, what things would you want to share? So that the first part of our discussion is going to be about content, methodology, and maybe some of the hints and tips that they would want to share with you. And the second part, Chris is here, is going to explain the call in detail and explain how the transfer network is going to operate. And then in both parts of those conversations, we're going to open up to the audience to have a bit of Q&A with you. We hope that you will leave this room super clear about how all this stuff works. And with all of your questions, I know lots of you have questions. We hope you'll leave the room with all of those questions answered. We've got until 10:30, so we've got just about an hour and 15 minutes. So we're going to jump into the content. We also have this fantastic thing here, which is a catch box mic. So when we open up to the audience, we're going to flip this out and you guys can use this to contribute and then pass it on. This is a nice example of why prepositions are important in language. So you can throw it to people, not at them. So we'll have a bit of fun with that later on. So we want to make this as interactive as possible. And I think first of all I'm going to invite Ian Graham from York and Sara Jervfors from Södertälje to come up and join me on the stage. Yeah, give a round of applause. Do you want to take a seat in these rather funny kind of mushroom type seats we've got here? You'll notice that URBACT always goes for unconventional furniture and spaces, so we're keeping the tradition going by having these pretty interesting chairs. So Ian and Sara were both involved in the pilot projects. I'll maybe ask both of you maybe just to introduce yourselves first of all. Tell us a bit about the project you were involved in, and then maybe I'll ask you a few questions about the experience you had. Maybe Sara, first of all, do you want to get us started?
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Sara Jervfors, and I'm head of diet unit in Södertälje municipality, which means that we serve around 24,000 portions per day to mainly school children. In a former EU project we developed a concept, an environmental and climate-friendly food concept that we implemented in this organization, and it's basically about using organic and locally produced food. So it was very successful, and then we became this good practice, and so I'm here today to share my experiences as a lead partner.
Okay, thanks Sara, and I'll ask you a few more things in a minute or two, but let's go to Ian. So Ian, again, just introduce yourself, tell us, I know your role's slightly different now, but at the time when the pilots were running, just tell us what your involvement was.
Yeah, so my name's Ian Graham. I'm now, part of what I do is as a URBACT expert, as a lead expert and ad hoc expert, but at the time of the transfer networks I was working for York City Council in the UK. And we were running an innovation process, an innovation model at the time, and we put that forward as a good practice in the transfer networks. And I was sort of the project lead for York, leading that transfer process with 3 other cities. So that was a model that was about collaborating with residents in a way to create new idea things for solutions. And something that's quite a lot more common now than I think it was at the time. But yeah, so that was the focus of our practice and our transfer network.
Okay, fantastic. And one of the things that some of the good practice cities have asked me while we've been here is, well, what's in it for them? So if you've got a good practice and you've got something which works really well in your city, why would you go through all the hassle and the grief and the challenge of leading a network? Because leading a network is a lot of work. It's a big responsibility. It's not something you jump into without thinking about. So I guess from Södertälje's point of view, what were the benefits from being a lead partner in a transfer network?
Actually, it was the competence that you could give us with the methods, but also to you get a lot of inspiration from the other cities. I had 3 cities from Spain and Poland and Lithuania, and they gave us many concrete examples that we could adapt in our future development in the concept. So that combination, the support from you, the URBACT method, and also the inspiration from the cities, but also you became very professional in running an EU-funded project. I mean, it's really hard to run these kind of projects. So and you really learn how to manage that, and that has great. After Diet for Green Planet, we received this huge EU-funded regional project, and I think that was a concrete outcome from Diet for Green Planet. So it was great for us.
Okay, so being involved in this was a kind of helpful stepping stone to moving on to bigger things, to different kinds of things related to the food work you were doing already.
Definitely.
Okay. Well, how about the York situation, Ian? Again, just the key thing about did the city benefit from leading this project?
Yes, I mean, it's a question I got asked, and I asked myself in the early stages of why are we doing this.
Yeah.
But very similar, I think. We learned so much about the practice, about how we operate. The process of having to document and codify what we did in a way that we could communicate to others made us really think about it. So as we were doing that, people asked questions and said, so you'd explain something and they'd say, this works like this, and they go, oh, so you mean this? And I'm like, no, but that's interesting, let's talk about that. So you found that in the process of trying to lay it out in steps, it made you realise that certain bits, whilst you've been using for a while, weren't as thought through or as deliberate as you might want them to be. We could rethink things, so it allowed us to evolve our own process, our own practice as we went, basically by learning through teaching, I suppose, in that sense.
Yeah. So did you make some adaptations to what you already had as a good practice as a result of that peer-to-peer exchange?
Definitely. It really influenced our thoughts about how you engage people, what different approaches were, because the different cities take different approaches to it, and so you see much the same. You see different examples. Because of the different context they work in, and then we took some of that and adapted it to bring that back into our own practice at home. So whilst that we've been using the practice we had for a year or two, it was still evolving, and the process of transfer really helped us evolve it much more quickly and much more effectively than if we just thought about it internally.
Yeah. And can you say a bit, Ian, about you mentioned there this, how important it is to be able to explain, use the word codify, to be able to explain and articulate and to really help people get a 3D picture of how it is you're working. And can you say a bit about the kind of methodology that you use? How did you work? I mean, what was the kind of approach you took in terms of the transfer?
The first thing we had to do was sit down and work out, okay, how do we describe it? Partly for the call, we had to do some of that, but then when we started to think about the methodology we were going to use to transfer, it started off with me making a rather ugly and unpleasant PowerPoint block diagram of the different components. And I think we then got someone more professional to come in and draw a better picture, which I think we've got a version of, yes, here, to sort of illustrate the process and the practice and to try and get it across more effectively. So this was a way of just bringing it to life a bit more, so it's not stale, it's not passive. We use this in a lot of the transfer workshops we ran with our cities, stepping them through the process. We had this translated into the languages of the native languages of the different countries to make sure it made sense for them, because some of these things don't translate literally. Terms that you assume in English are very specific, actually you realise are maybe something different when you translate it literally. So there's a bit of work to work through that. But again, the graphic illustrator who helped us put this together actually challenged our thinking, because she was trying to capture what do you mean by this particular aspect, and we suddenly thought, well, actually, we're not sure. And we actually, with her, we'd had a good conversation to be a bit clearer. From the original diagram I did to this, we changed the process a little bit, because it made us just rethink, actually, we should do that differently. We've done it that way before, but we should change it. So it was a constant evolution, but the cities themselves really valued this as a quite simple but quite effective way of understanding it. And we sort of use this as a basis in workshops. We'd be referring to it and people would talk about different parts of it, so it worked really, really well.
That's great. And just say a bit about in a typical URBACT network, and I know that many of the people that are new to URBACT, but in a typical URBACT network, all the cities will go to most other cities. They'll go to see, in situ, how things are working. I think you took a slightly different approach.
Yeah.
To say a little bit about that.
This was the first URBACT project that York had run, so we didn't come in with any preconceptions around it. But when we looked at the methodology we wanted to take to do the transfer, we thought that going around everyone in each city at first was not going to be an effective use of the resource, time, or funding we had for everything else. So we took the approach of, after doing initial baselining visits, which the lead expert did to understand the context in each city, we had a small team from York with the lead expert, did visits individually to each city to run a series of transfer workshops with them, so with the key project team and their local group, to actually explain the practice using this map and other tools to explain the principles, explain the steps, and then to actually take them through a dummy run of the process, so they really got to sort of touch and feel it and understand how it worked and how it felt. Obviously, for a more process-based piece of practice, it's easier than going through and dummy building a new seafront development, or if it's a construction. But the point was to take them through the process of understanding it. And once we'd done that, we then did some more work where we brought them all to York together to see how we ran it in York, and then we had a couple of further meetings where we were all together in different cities. But the first point was about bilateral transfer between us as the lead partner and the city adopting it. And I think that worked well because it meant the conversation we had in those workshops, the questions that people asked, were all specific to the local conditions. So rather than having to reconcile questions about the conditions in Tallinn versus the conditions in Sicily, two of our partners were from, actually when we were in Tallinn it was focused about the context in Tallinn and how they wanted to use it in Tallinn. When we were in Sicily it was about how they wanted to use it in Siracusa. When we were in Spain it was about how they wanted to use it in San Sebastian. So it meant that those conversations in those transfer workshops allowed us to really focus in on the local application of it, not a general application of it, and that helped the local people to understand how they could use it.
Okay, we'll come back to that point about adaptation and the local context and understanding the transfer potential. We'll come back to that later, but Sara, again, just say a little bit about how you worked as a network. So who was in the partnership? Just tell us a bit about how you shared your good practice with them. How did they get to understand the work you were doing in Södertälje from your transfer perspective?
I think we worked in a similar way as York. My team went to each partner, and because we saw that each administration in each country were very different. So we really had to understand the administration in each country. It was totally different, maybe in Spain compared to Lithuania. In Lithuania, they couldn't take any decisions on local level because they were on the national level. So we had to have a totally make the plans totally different. Actually, in Spain, in Mollet Valle, they have this parents board. They were running the restaurant. No, they weren't running the restaurant, but they made contracts with the restaurants. So it was very different. And also the way the politicians were involved. In Spain, the politicians were involved in the whole process. In Lithuania, we hardly saw them. So it was really different. So that is really like, if you should be lead partner, you should start to look at the administration in each country to support them in the best way.
And I suppose, in your case, where you were looking at the potential power of public procurement in the school canteen system, procurement is quite a technical issue. It varies from country to country. I guess you had some legal and technical issues to look at in terms of how transferable your procurement model was to places like Mollet, for example, or to some of the other partners. How easy was that to look at the procurement, the transferability of a procurement system to other places?
Actually, I think that was the easiest part, because we have this public procurement is it's the same in the whole Europe. It's supposed to be the same, and the structure at least. And I think that is one of our really like strength in Sweden, that we are very good in systems, and we have our monitoring systems are really great, and so I think Mollet, they were really happy. We could support them in a good way, because that was chaotic. Okay. I'll just ask you a final question about maybe some hints and tips, some key learning points that you took away from it, and I'm going to invite Oliver to join us, and I'm looking for Daniela, but I don't think Daniela's here yet. Daniela's here, great, fantastic. I'm going to ask Daniela and Oliver to join us shortly. There are, actually, if you're a good practice city, could you just stand up, please, so we can see? Okay, so, quite a lot. Okay. If you are thinking about submitting a proposal to become a good practice transfer lead, can you stay standing? Okay, so if you're thinking about leading a network, you're standing up. So quite a lot of people in the room. Thanks guys, that's great. Gives us a sense of who's in the room. So for those who are thinking about submitting a proposal, those who are thinking about leading a network, from the work that you've been involved in and the things you learn, any tips, hints, things you would want to pass on to them?
Yeah, certainly for me, it was definitely about being self-aware as a project team and as a city, so being able to be open to new thoughts, being critical of yourself, challenging your own process. I think that's how you learn from it, that's how you get the benefit. It's almost saying, don't assume you know the practice as well as anybody else. You might find that other partners you take on actually adapt it and run it better than you do, and you can learn from that. If you go in with we're already finished, we're already done, we've nothing to learn, you don't get you might get less value from it, I suppose. I think the other thing is about having a coaching approach. So rather than a very directive, this is exactly how it has to work, it's about getting the best out of the cities you're working with. So if you're transferring something to another city, it's helping them to understand it, helping them to make it their own and work it, and giving them direction, but also giving them space. So not sort of being this is exactly how it has to work, because chances are, as we discovered, you don't know it best for their circumstances, so you have to be sort of willing to adapt it.
Okay, so we'll come back to the coaching thing later, because we need to talk about expertise. Sarah, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think that from day one you should think, like, when the project is gone, how can you use these methods and all the new inspiration and everything that you get from the project in the ordinary work? That is very important. And also when you create these local support groups, that you really make an effort to think in a broad way, like who are the stakeholders, and really get the people that are that are already involved. You shouldn't like try to find new ways or find new people to involve. I think you should use the people that are already working in this area, because then when the project is gone, you can continue to work.
Okay, and I mean again, you touched upon this the ULG thing, the stakeholders. We'll come back, and Chris will maybe say a little bit about that, and we'll maybe talk about that later. This thing about coaching. I mean, one of the things about URBACT is cities build trusted relationships with people and with other cities. And one of the really powerful things I think about this way of working is, you know, good practice cities. You're not selling something to someone else. It's about sharing. And it's also about honest sharing. So quite often I know that in both these cases and also in the other case we'll hear about from Oliver, cities are very honest about saying we did this and it didn't work. And sometimes you learn more from the things that didn't work, from the things that did work. So you can avoid making the mistakes which we all make when we're trying to do something new. So that trusted relationship is really important. And that notion of coaching. So we talk about experts, and I use this because it's sometimes an unhelpful term, but that coaching principle, you're being alongside people and be able to walk in their shoes and to see their local situation and really understanding therefore some of the barriers to adapting and some of the assets to adapting, and that whole issue is really kind of important too. We might say a wee bit more about that as we talk about the transfer dimension. I'm going to ask Oliver Hasselman from Bremen to come and join us, and also Daniela to come and join us. I'll maybe ask the two of you again, just grab a seat. Again, just to introduce yourselves, tell us where you were at the time when the projects were running. So I know that you're both in slightly different situations now. And then maybe we'll shift our attention a little bit to this notion of what's in it for the transfer cities, because you have both those perspectives. So maybe Daniela, first of all, just to say hi and tell us what was your involvement in the transfer pilot networks?
Hello, good morning everybody. So I'm Daniela Batti. I currently, some of you might know me because I work together with the city of Geneva on a running action planning network, but at the time I was working as a coordinator for the city of Rome that had a slightly different setting. We were the lead partners, but we were receiving city of the good practice. So.
Okay, yeah, Oliver?
I'm Oliver Hasselman, and yeah, we work for the city of Bremen and contracted to implement a temporary youth agency in Bremen. And this practice of a temporary youth agency working with vacancy was the best practice in the TUTUR network. I think so. The city of Bremen was giving city in that project, and we right now, city of Bremen is partner in the refill network.
Okay,
so we continue to be URBACT City.
Okay, yeah, there's no escape, folks. Once you come in, there's no way out. So, but the focus is on the reuse of empty public spaces. It's a hot topic. It still is a hot topic. So, from the perspective of the transfer network, we've talked a bit about the good practice cities. What do you think were the most important things that helped the transfer networks? What were the good things that we saw from the TUTUR work, which you felt was effective in supporting the transfer process? Maybe Daniela, first of all.
So the project of TUTUR was working on temporary use of vacant buildings, and we have also the colleagues of Alba Julia here, who were also we were 3 partners in the network. So maybe they would like to add on something later, but. For us, probably the thing that was most interesting of the experience of Bremen was learning about the policy structure and the administrative setting. This was probably the thing that was most interesting, because the setting is extremely different. In Rome we have a very strong squatting system, we can so call it, but it's very difficult to find a legal way. It's very politically conflictual, so we needed to find new policy instruments or adapt the existing policy instruments. So the work, although albeit at the time the transfer a bit too short, it was extremely useful in this sense to really focus with the help of the city of Bremen on revising all the existing work that there is in the city on the topic, and understanding how to twist it, so to say.
Okay. And what kind of methodologies do you think were you using in the TUTUR network which were helpful for the transfer partners?
Well, unlike the other cities, we had this visits in the partner cities, and I think the very first meeting was in Bremen. And well, on the first day we were not going out and sitting all the day on the structures and thinking about how do we organize this work, who is doing what and who is not, so we could really show more or less how it is organized. And then the next day we went out to see the examples of temporary use and speak with the people who are involved, not only in the administration but as well as the people who are running those different kind of temporary use projects. And that was really from long term to short term, from quite posh to nearly very subcultural.
Okay.
So the range was quite wide then.
Yeah, okay. And you refer to the fact that the timescales were really short for your pilots. I mean, and we'll have 30 months altogether. It's a two-stage process, 6 months and then 24 months afterwards. I mean, what other kind of challenges? I mean, we had a quick chat earlier in this event about some of the challenges, Daniela, which came out of that experience, and this is essentially to have a reality check. This is not something you go into without really thinking carefully about it. So what are some of the challenges you think is important for people to know about before they sign up and jump into a transfer network experience?
Long list.
How long have we got?
A couple of key points maybe. So, at a local level, I think you need to, it's everything I'm going to say, you're going to think, oh, this is obvious. But I think it's worth saying, because I think maybe when you're in the flow, it might not be as obvious as it might sound. So one thing is probably making sure that you already understand of a very complex good practice that has a lot of different aspects in it, which aspects you're most interested in. Of course you're interested in the overall thing, but which are the aspects where you're really going to concentrate in that limited amount of time that you have and limited resources. Sorry, URBACT team, I have to say it's not the richest of programs, so you have to take into account this. So for us, for example, we realized that it was the procurement aspect of it all was probably the most, we didn't have problems in the community activations, citizens are very active anyway, so we developed some guidelines, for example, on the existing procurement process, so to help people in understanding how to proceed. And I think this is something that you have to figure out what exactly you want to take of the thing, because otherwise it might be a bit too much. And this is also helpful to think about that, because your local context is going to be so different that you really have to, and the good practice doesn't know, so you have to be able already from before to try and think of also who are your key stakeholders within the administration and outside, which is like the URBACT methodology suggests or imposes somehow the involvement of the local stakeholders, but this, you're the one that knows who's really essential. You could be inviting anybody to some extent, so you really have to make sure that they are the key ones. And this is a relevant aspect because now, I don't know when are the elections in the next city, in your city, but they might be throughout the project, or they might be just at the end of the project, as unexpectedly happened in the city of Rome. And this means that if you don't have the political continuity, the project finishes, and just as you said, the important thing was that there was a next step after the end of the project, because if not, well, very nice to travel to other cities and exchange, and it's all nice, but still. So, if I could share one thing for us that happened was we finished the project. Not everything had worked quite as we expected, but we were overall satisfied. The city council fell, and this meant that nowadays the citizens are working quite autonomously on the projects, but the city council didn't manage to develop a new policy framework for the readaptment of the buildings, which was the whole point.
Yeah, frustrating.
And in this sense, I think the last tip, and then I'll pass on to the others, is as obvious as it may sound, I saw some people already have a good practice but decided not to run a network themselves, is also to consider how much work it is on an administrative level. There's Thierry there from the Secretariat, and all the team from the administrative team knows very well that they will get you to work a lot, not only on the content, which we're talking about now, and Chris there will be running after you for all deliverables, financial reporting,
single team, a small team. They led the project, but actually they did a huge amount of work to get the relevant politicians on board, to get the relevant municipality staff on board, which for the thing we were trying to do, which was changing how a municipality works quite a lot, was quite hard, so it was quite key. But I think it applies to most practices. If you're running it in isolation, in a little team, it's quite difficult to achieve, and we had some of that trouble in York actually, as the team was running the transfer, and we found partway through we'd been so focused on transferring it, we were forgetting to push the learning back out into the wider organisation, and we had to sort of do that on the back foot a little bit afterwards. So I think there's definitely a thing about the wider commitment of the city to the process, whether transferring or receiving, definitely.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. Sara?
I agree. You have to, from day one, you have to work with involvement. It's involvement from politician level to decision level on city servants and on the whole society, and also with the establishment. Because I mean, your method is really great, and it's very easy that you want to be like a good girl and do the right things, and then you forget the people and the city. So it's really like involvement from day one.
Okay. Oliver, anything to add in terms of challenges and things that these people need to know before they make a decision to get involved?
Well, as we were, the time until we took part of the project was quite short, so we were asked, I mean, like 2 or 3 weeks before the tutor started, more or less. Of course, that was quite a jump, and first of all, in convincing local administration and politics to take part in the project. So we really then had to involve in the process the people to what we wanted to do, and I mean, the nice thing about the URBACT is that we had opportunities to work with a lot of new tools and frames for this participation processes. So we really use that to have like uncommon methods to invite the people to take part in the development, and that worked quite well. And this is, I think, it was something we couldn't do without the URBACT.
Okay, great. I just want to ask a quick thing specifically about adaptation, because we talked earlier about it's unusual to see a practice which you can kind of copy-paste, pick up and drop somewhere else, and we talked a bit about the contextual differences, we talked a bit about the political environment. You need to look at the a 360-degree analysis of the location before you begin this adapting process. And I mean, Ian, you mentioned Syracuse there, and big contextual differences between the north of England and Sicily. So can you maybe say a little bit about, because we talked earlier about the diagram, you mentioned that this was particularly helpful there. What kind of adaptations did they have to make to embed your way of working in a very different context?
Yeah, so obviously it's a radically different situation in many ways. York is quite an affluent city, Syracuse much less so. It's got bigger pockets of poverty, and actually at the point we were running the process of transfer, we were focusing quite heavily on a digital and online engagement as a way to work with people in the city. And obviously for them, where I think only about 40% of people regularly use the internet, it's much more challenging. In school, not all schools have access to computers in parts of their city, so using an online platform and an online way of engaging and using digital tools to engage was much harder for them. So they had to think about, well, how do we want to use the platform? We see the benefit of the reach that gives us, but actually how could they work in a way that complements that as well? So they need to think about offline ways of engaging people, and actually that's when it starts to play to their strengths. They're much better at working in communities and drawing people together and having conversations. So they developed their own way of complementing the online engagement with a series of offline things, and that's one of the things that we actually learned and engaged into our process and took some of how they worked, which are things we'd never thought to do.
Yeah,
so some of the suggestions they said, we wanted to use it on this, we were like, no, don't do that, that's not going to work. Oh, it has worked, okay. So we made assumptions of what would work and what wouldn't work in their context, but they were able to adapt it to fit. I think that's an important part of it, is to allowing that to happen a little bit.
Yeah, and some of that's going to let it go as well, isn't it? Because they need to test and innovate and try things, and the way they do won't always work. So it's partly about sort of standing back and testing some new ways. Yeah. And what about you? Similar things are where Moyet, in Catalonia, they're up and running. They're
Yes,
using
yes,
and they've adapted, and so tell us a little. That's also a very different context to Sweden. Again, what are they doing, and what have they? How have they adapted and changed what your original good practice to their context?
Actually, they have this what do you call it? As an area where they grow farming, protected farming. And the school meals, they are buying vegetables from this protected area, called GX, and they actually haven't started at the point when they joined Guide for a Green Planet, but today they didn't. I think 3 or 4 of the public school restaurants are buying vegetables today, and before that they didn't. So they really improved.
Great. And just one final thing, I'm going to go and walk around with this mic in a sec to bring the audience in. Experts. So, if you're a transfer network, you'll have access to URBACT expertise. We have this pool of experts. Chris will say a little bit more about that when he gives the presentation. We talked a bit about coaching, trust. Can you say a little bit about, I suppose the question, how do we get the best out of an expert? If you've never worked with an expert before and you have this great resource and this asset to use, maybe Daniel, maybe ask you first of all, because again you've been on both sides of this experience, so what advice would you give? Flip your hats round and tell us how do you get the best out of an expert if you're running a project like this?
Okay, so the term of expert, it's always a bit weird because it sounds. So, first of all, the expert has to have 2 types of knowledges, 2 types of expertise, so to say. One is specific, like, about the content itself. They have to understand what is the topic you're working with, of course, but they will never be as knowledgeable, unless they are specifically from your city, but that's quite rare. They will not be as knowledgeable as you are of your good practice, but what they will know is about methodology of also learning exchange with other cities, which most likely this is not your core business on a day-to-day basis. So these are the 2 things that the expert has to be able to jump quite confidently with. They have to be a critical friend, so you will be working with them a lot, especially in phase 1. Now I can share more the experience of myself as being an expert in the current network. With the lead partner from Geneva, the first 6 months you visit all the cities, and you will be having approximately 8, I think, partners. You will be traveling a lot, and you will be spending a lot of time together. So you have to also find somebody that you trust, that you have to build a relationship with, because you will be working very intensely together. So it has to be somebody that you can manage to have a very honest dialogue. You have to also be telling about the stuff that didn't work in your good practice, and your partners have to be able to tell them what the difficulties they have as well. So there is a human dynamic that is important. Of course, you cannot checklist that off the database only, so checklist the professional side of the website, which has all the CVs and everything, but also make sure to have, a Skype, a good chat with the people. And also, I think you have to be able to trust a little bit, also to let go, as Eddie was saying, because you have a good practice and you've invested a lot of work on it. Probably it's not even finished, so let's be honest, it's like you're not delivering a finished package, you're delivering an ongoing process, and somebody else will be doing it in a totally different way, and you will be thinking, they're killing what I've done for years. Yeah. So you have to be able to, and this is where also the expert will help you, because it will be able to sort of do exactly as you lot in York was saying you did, is to be able to trust that Siracusa will do something that doesn't sound too good, but help them so that along the way they will actually succeed.
Okay. Let's move across. So we heard this thing about trust several times. We heard this combination of process, skills, so understanding about methodologies and ways of working, being a bit of a troubleshooter, being a bit of a diplomat maybe sometimes, being a bit of a psychotherapist sometimes from my experience as well. Also this content knowledge. I'm not sure how important content knowledge is. We might come on to that. Ian, just the same thing. How do we get the best out of experts?
Yeah, again, I'm in an interesting position because I'm a lead expert on one of the implementation networks, and actually one of the things we've really seen through that is understanding is, I suppose, building what Daniela said, but in that baselining phase, understanding the context in each city. So when for a transfer network, you'll be implementing something in each city again. And the conditions that exist there, and the subtleties of the political situation, the economic situation, the geographical situation, depending on your practice, different parts of that will be really important. So there'll be certain things that make your good practice work. It might be certain political buy-in, it might be certain economic situation, it might be certain social norms that exist in your city. And that's where I think the expert can really help bring in an outside perspective, an objective perspective on all the cities to help understand first your own practice as a good practice city. Why does it work in your city? What are the really core bits that have to be there for it to work, and which bits are flexible, which bits can be adapted? And then in each of the partner cities, they can really help to get to a grip with where a different city is going to find different aspects difficult, because everyone will have different capabilities and different challenges. So some cities will have to adjust their environment to make the practice work. Other cities will have to adjust the practice a bit to make it fit their environment. So I think the expert can play a really crucial role in being objective and helping identify that clearly, I think.
Okay, so we've heard the phrase critical friend, this objective, impartial sounding board role. Sara, anything else you want to add? The same thing about how a good expert can help from the work you were involved in?
From my point of view, I think we were a bit different from yours, because my lead expert was a former colleague from the former EU project where we invented this Light for the Planet project. So we knew each other very well, and also the team that were involved, we have been working for many years. So we complemented each other very well. So, but as you say, I mean, you became, I mean, you are like a partner, and you live together like 24 hours. So during the whole project period, so you really have to like the person and to be honest. And,
It's a very intense working relationship, isn't it? Oliver, a final word to you, and then we'll start throwing this around.
Yeah, I think the important thing about the lead expert and the lead partner as a team, so from my view as well, is to make the partners work as easy as possible. Yeah. So that you, I mean, just have to fill in more or less the content, and as the expert already knows what is the specific situation, what is the strengths and best practice in your city, he helps, or is also the lead partner, help to collect all the best practices in the different cities, so that really everybody can benefit out of these practices in the different cities.
Absolutely.
So something which is working very well at the project right now, and in the TUTUR as well. I mean, even as the cities were very different from large scale to very small scale.
Okay, great. So this, I mean, one of the things which we are asking the experts to do is to help codify, describe, articulate the good practice. We've heard how important it is for people to understand how the good practice is, and part of this event is about that whole thing. Secondly, assessing the transfer potential and looking at the adaptation process that each city will have to go through to make this kind of alchemy, this kind of transfer from city X to Y. So these are really kind of important things to think about when you're thinking about the kind of expertise you need. So I'm going to hand over to Chris shortly, but before I do, I'm just going to invite you to any questions. This is a peer-to-peer conversation. We deliberately didn't have people come and giving you an airbrushed, hey, this is a rosy, perfect view. This is a very frank and candid insight into what it's like to run a transfer network. I think it's been very interesting, really, from my point of view, very helpful. Anybody got any questions or any comments? This is a bit like this thing here. Here is from the Woody Allen film, Sleeper, where you have the orgasmatron that nobody wants to let, actually when you hold this, you really don't want to let it go. But I do want to let it go. I want to give it to someone. So who wants to ask a question to one of our panelists? Pop a hand up and I'll throw this at you or to you. Here we are. Can you catch it? Okay. Can you introduce yourself, please, and then give us your question?
Hello, I am Ana Paula. I am from Amadora. We are currently in a planning network. It is rival cities, and I'd like to ask to the lead expert. I'm sorry, I did not register the name. We have the main microphone. Yes.
Yeah.
What was the most difficult task that you have to perform as lead expert in your good practice network, in your transfer network?
Okay. I might actually ask others may have that interest in that. What's the most difficult thing? Do you want to hold on to it?
I'm trying to think back on my own experience and the experience of our lead expert in the transfer network. I think a lot of it is actually getting to grips with how on board, how keen the transfer cities are. So actually really, there's some quite frank conversations, I think, when you're talking to mayors or project teams or whoever, and sort of trying to get from them, are you really up for this? This is going to require it's going to be really good, but you've got to put something into it. There might be some difficult decisions. And sometimes you do get the, as you called it, the airbrushed view of like, oh yes, we're all very up for it, we're all very keen. And actually it's quite hard to be able to, in the right way, but just to push a little bit and understand actually what's going on here. Are they giving us the right view, and are they really highlighting their own capabilities and their own gaps in the right way? That can be quite a challenge, I think, to really.
So you have to be quite assertive.
Yeah.
Sara, did you want to give in on that one?
I wasn't the lead partner, but I can say my lead partner's greatest challenge was the schedule, because of the cultural differences. In Sweden, we are like, if we say that you should be here at 8 o'clock, we are here at 8 o'clock. In Spain, I don't know, they come like 8:30 or something, and a really high-level person, so we were shocked, because that doesn't happen in Sweden. And we made this schedule that they should produce a handbook for the Diet for Green Planet in each city, and we said, at that time you should be ready with this and like this date. But they didn't, we thought that if we had an agreement, then we can follow it up like 2 weeks before or something. But it didn't work like that. So it was really different. It's culture differences. So,
Okay. And we've got, I can see people nodding, smiling. I know we've got several experts in the room, and there are other people. So, you're a bit of a sheepdog. You're kind of going around making sure the flock are all going in the right direction. You never make any assumptions. You always test things because we're all from different places. We all work in different ways. Any other hands going up? Yeah, can you just flip that across? So, Pilar, introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Pilar. I come from Spain, from Peralta. We have a social innovation project for the local administration. My question, we are new to URBACT. We've never done anything with URBACT before, but we are very short in human resources. So my question is, how many people are working in the transfer network in your cities? Like maybe half of their working time, or maybe completely for the transfer network?
Okay, I don't know how easy that is to answer, because these were short-running pilots. They're a bit different to what we're running, and Chris might say a wee bit about this too, but anyway, it's an interesting question. So, do you want to jump in? And then maybe Daniela has some views on that too, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit different in the pilot networks, because we had quite a short, intense period of time. We only had 15 months to do the transfer, so we had to move quite quickly. Someone asked me this yesterday, and I had to stop and think about it, but I think I was the main. There was two of us working on the majority of the content of the project, and we had someone doing part-time on the administration. But the two of us who were working on the content weren't doing it full-time. I guess it was the busy periods. I was spending 4 days a week, 3.5, 4 days a week on it. But at other points, it was just a little bit to keep it going. An hour here to have a conversation with one of the partners. So it does go up and down. That's one of the important things to recognise. You can't say I'm putting 1 day a week on it or 2 days a week on it and that's fixed, because the reality of it is when you're coming up to a transnational meeting or a workshop, you've got to put a lot of time into the preparation. You're away during it and then you have to follow up. But then at other points it's a bit different. So it varies from city to city, but I think it was, a few days a week between two of us was how we managed it. And I think for us on the whole, it was largely kept within the funding that we get for that part of the programme, covered most of the time we spent in it, or the 80% as it's co-financed, but we didn't feel that we were having to put a huge amount of extra time in. But the thing I would say is, particularly as a lead partner, if it's something that you're not going to get the learning out of, then it becomes less of a value. A lot of the development of the practice we were going to do anyway. We were actively trying to develop the practice, and participating in the transfer network really helped us to do that. So actually some of the work we were doing, codifying it, working out different ways of working it locally, were done through the project because we needed to do it for both. So that's where it makes a real difference, I think. If you're doing it as an add-on to your day job and it's sort of over here, but this is what you're supposed to be doing, it's much more of a challenge, I think. You need to have some dedicated time on it.
Okay. I don't know, Daniela, Sara, could you say a little bit about this question of capacity, time?
Yeah, I have the same focus actually, that you're doing what you're doing in your ordinary work, but you can do it much better because of the project. So for me, during this time it was very intensive, so like 50% of my working time. So then I had to delegate some of my ordinary work to other people in my organization. But that was just, it was, I talked earlier about this involvement. Actually, when I told people to do things that they normally didn't do, then they got more involved in the process. So and all the activities that we did, all this bilateral exchange, it was my staff. They went to these countries, and then the people come to us. So it was really I had focused to make this project in the ordinary work.
Okay. I think we're also here. It's very hard to say exactly because it goes in cycles. There's also diffuse against different people in the organisation. I give the final word to Daniela, because I know there's more questions, but we'll have a chance to pick up all the questions at the end after Chris's presentation. So Daniela, it's this issue of, you mentioned capacity, you said earlier, think carefully about how much responsibility and how much, what's your answer to Pilar's question from Zaragoza?
So maybe one thing to Pilar and to the others is also to consider that it's not that this is not something that only one person will be able to do in your organization, because unless you have a super multitasking colleague that can take care of it, but I don't know, because you will be needing somebody that takes care of all the admin part of it, and that you have to be able to, understand English documents, and there's all this component. Then you have the people that will be dealing actually with coordinating the content. And steering, like from a decision-making point, maybe doing the coordination with the politicians, because you want your local politicians on board to see the potential for the next steps in your city. And then you need somebody that is on the ground, and most likely this depends on how your organization is set. But if you want to organize like the so-called ULG, the URBACT local groups, or your local stakeholders, meetings on a regular basis and so on, often this happens that it's not people in this, like the civil servants, that have enough time. So this might be something that you hire somebody outside to give you a hand in organizing all the meetings, that has knowledge about how to do stakeholder involvement. So the overall amount of time is a couple of days a week on average, but it's done from very different people. So you have to also think about which team you're going to select.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Daniela. Thanks to all of you. We have a coffee break after this finishes, so you'll have a chance to catch these guys and ask them a bit more at the end of it. So, but for now, can you just join with me and say thanks very much to all of them? So, we invite Chris up. Many of you will already know Chris. Chris has been involved in issuing the call, in getting the package right. So we thought it would be very helpful just to reiterate and to explain the call, the details of the call, have a chance to engage you in a discussion about this. We'll also have, we had a session last night with the National URBACT Points, very detailed discussion again about the calls. So each of your NUPs is also super well informed about all aspects of the transfer call and how these networks will operate. So there are lots of different people you can go to talk to, but Chris, if you could just kind of take a step back and give us a big picture, and then we'll open it out to the audience for some Q&A.
Thank you, Eddie.
Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Kristian. I think Eddie already told everything about me, so it's not necessary that I add something else. I think this was very useful because it was a real experience from how it works in practice, and so now you'll be able maybe to put together the puzzles with my technical presentation, which is going to be maybe a bit more boring, but it's useful because you can then put together the two different dimensions to have the whole view. So, as we already said, this is more like a closed call. It follows the call for good practices based on 97 good practices selected, and we have a call for up to 25 networks, transfer networks, so quite a big number of possible transfer networks. We also said that why we are doing this. I think you all also understand maybe better now that good practices deserve to be shared among other cities in Europe. But from program perspective, these transfer networks fit to our specific objective to improve the implementation of sustainable urban strategies and action plans in cities. So it's about improving implementation of policies in cities from our program specific objective view. We repeated several times that we work on the principle with transfer networks on the principles of understanding the good practice, adapting it, and then reusing it. And this is also how we then also designed the whole journey for the transfer networks. The phase one, so it's following this principle, understand, adapt, reuse, and phase one actually is about understanding. So, application for phase one will be about two things: providing a clear description of the good practice and assessing the transfer potential in each transfer city. And you will have an expert that will help you with that. They were already talking about that it was really important to see the local context, to visit the cities. So this is what actually phase one is about. It's about developing your project for phase two, which is then actually the actual transfer. This is where the actual transfer happens then afterwards. So this first 6 months is about developing the project, elaborating it. So just to repeat quickly, transfer networks is for cities that are interested in transferring the good practice. Select the label of 97 good practices to be transfer cities, and for awarded urban good practice cities as good practice cities in the network. So transfer network will be composed of a good practice city plus transfer cities which are transferring it. So what does it mean to work in URBACT? I think some bits were already mentioned, but it is a unique opportunity to learn from peers across Europe and experiment and test tried solutions, effective solutions, or so on. So actually, this is what Europe is all about. Actually, it's about sharing knowledge between cities. It's about minimizing the disequilibrium from more developed, less developed. It's about mutual learning. It's about mutual progress. And this is what you have. This is where these transnational activities can. This is what the transnational activities can give you. The second part is enhancing capacities for policy making and delivery, and this happens on the local level. This happens in so-called URBACT local groups, and these were also mentioned. And this is where you gather different stakeholders and you improve this participatory approach and you learn how to manage it. For transfer cities, it's going to be about adaptation and reuse of the good practice in the own context, and for good practice cities, it's going to be about refining and improving their methodology. Then you have support from URBACT program. An URBACT program is quite a big thing. We can say it's composed of different concepts. So one thing is validated experts, the other thing are program experts, which are more like a coaching experts for networks. Then there is URBACT Secretariat, which coordinates all the process, and there are also national URBACT points, which help networks to disseminate the results and support them on the national level in national languages. And then, of course, there is also some financial resources behind that for exchange. As we said already, 97 good practice cities are only eligible to be lead partners in transfer networks, and all cities that are interested in transferring the good practice are eligible. In phase 1, only cities, and in phase 2, also non-city partners can join, but this can be only local agencies, and this is only up to 2. Just maybe one question: can you stand up the ones that are newcomers to URBACT and have never been in URBACT network before? Can you stand up? Okay, quite a big number, so thank you very much. This way I will be able to adapt a bit my speech in continuation. Okay, so I will just have one glass of water, my throat is a bit very dry. Okay, so partnership for phase 1 is very simple. It should be comprised of a good practice and 2 transfer cities. So it's quite easy. I mean, you are already a good practice, and there should be another 2 cities. So we facilitate a bit this process so that it would be easy for you to apply for this development phase 1. Each transfer network in phase 2 will have up to 7 transfer cities plus the good practice city, and a minimum of 5 partners, including the good practice city. And there are also some rules about where the cities should come from, because, as I said, it's about having cities from less developed regions, transition regions, and more developed regions, so that they share their knowledge between themselves. So all this is very, very well explained in terms of reference, but I can just maybe say, so minimum of 2 partners from less developed, if the partnership is composed of 5 partners, minimum of 3 from less developed regions if the total number is 6 to 7, and a minimum of 4 from less developed regions where the total number of partners is 8. For phase 1, it's only 1 partner that needs to be from less developed. So 1 transfer network or good practice city. So 1 partner needs to be from less developed regions. Very important to say also that good practice cities can take part in another transfer network as transfer cities. So if you are a good practice city in 1 transfer network, you can also be a transfer city, but not a good practice, in another transfer network. So we open this to you, and we can only have partners that come from different, all partnerships have to be composed of partners coming from different member states. So only 1 member state in partnership can be present. So this means if we have 5 partners, 5 cities have to come from different states. And you can be a partner only in 1 transfer network, not 2, a transfer city. Yeah? Okay, good practices will have now in this process of application process important role. They will need to select good potential transfer cities to propose them for phase 1. In the guide, we prepared for you some nice suggestions how you can do that, but these are just a few questions that should be raised when having a dialogue with potential transfer cities. So it's very important to see if the potential transfer city is actually addressing this policy issue that the good practice is addressing. It also needs to have a commitment, and this needs to be shown. You need to present this commitment. Also in the guide we say what this commitment is about. Transfer cities should be aware of what means to be in a transfer network, and this is well explained in the guide. Also, you should make sure, the good practice cities, that the partners have financial resources to actually finance the transfer to have the financial resources for the good practice and transfer of good practice. This is important. and of course they need to be eligible in the framework of the call. So being less developed or more developed. So financial resources. It was already mentioned that finances in URBACT are not huge. Yes, they're not, because we don't finance the infrastructural projects or the actual projects like urban innovative actions. We finance the exchange and learning process on transnational level and local level, and this is the budget that can be used for transfer networks. It's 600,000 euros for both phases. And in phase 1, the total budget for 6 months can be up to 80,000 euros. All this is a total budget, so it means that there is a co-financing rate from ERDF fund, which is 70% for cities coming from developed regions and 85% for cities coming from transition and less developed regions. These regions you can check on the map, which is published on the regional policy website. It's also available here on this slide, and I think we will share the slide, and you can also get the slide on the URBACT website, so you can check these details. Okay, maybe also for Switzerland, only 50% is covered by ERDF, and for Norwegian partners, they can participate, but on their own cost. Okay, another thing that was mentioned is the expert support. And this is additional financial resource that each transfer network will have, and it's an envelope for having experts, which is 109,000, accordingly, approximately 109,000 euros, and it covers 146 days of expertise, which can be used in phase 1 and phase 2. This is quite a big support, I would say. If you compare it with some other programs, this expertise envelope is quite big, and it really gives you a chance to have a concrete support from experts. And in phase 1, in this phase where you will develop and elaborate your project, you will have 26 days for the experts. All the experts have to be chosen from the URBACT 3 pool of validated experts, and on the URBACT website there is the list of all these experts. You can check them out. You can also select them by their type of expertise. But there is also another thing. All partners have the possibility to use additional external expertise inside the network budget. So this is then integrated into this financial envelope that is co-financed by ERDF. But this one is not. So this is really a pure envelope that doesn't include the co-financing rates. This is pure envelope for expertise. And it's paid, experts are paid directly from the program. So for phase 1, actually, you will need to propose 3 experts. These experts can be both lead and ad hoc validated URBACT experts, and all lead experts and ad hoc experts that are now already involved in ongoing URBACT networks, action planning and implementation can be proposed for transfer network in phase 1. And then assessment panel, based on your 3 proposals, will make a recommendation for you which expert would be the best for you to use in phase 1. And then, in phase 1, you will be able, also like it was mentioned, to test this relationship between you and the experts, and you will be able to evaluate the performance. And then you will have a choice either to continue with the same expert in phase 1, in phase 2, and the expert becomes a lead expert. Then you have additional ad hoc experts on the ad hoc basis. Or you can decide to have another expert that you think would be better. So phase 1 is also an opportunity to test this relationship. Submission procedure. So transfer cities cannot submit the application. Only good practice cities can submit the application. So transfer cities, if you want to join, you need to contact good practice cities. And all the contact details are available on good practice profiles on the URBACT website. And maybe some of you even did already some networking with this QR code, and you already have contacts with your good practices. And then, when good practices are ready to submit the application, they should contact us, URBACT Secretariat, on this email, tm@urbact.eu, and on your request, we will open the Synergy online platform for you. And then you will be able to log in and submit the application. The deadline is 10 January 2018. And very important also for transfer cities, for possible transfer cities, please do the contacts as quickly as possible, because 2 places can be taken very quickly. But still, for good practice cities, since you know that in phase 1 you will need to enlarge the partnership from 2 transfer cities to up to 4, from 4 to 7, you can have a short list already of potential cities next to on the table. Okay, and maybe another question: the good practice cities that will already fill up their shortlist, they can contact us also, and we can make an indication on the good practice profiles that you are closing, you're not open anymore for any more interest from potential transfer cities. Assessment process will be usual. The URBACT assessment process will have external assessment panel, which will assess the applications for phase 1, and then they will be approved by the monitoring committee on 4 April 2018, and this is actually then the starting date of phase 1. Very important, layout of application form and the criteria are available in the terms of reference. So you don't need to request for an online Synergy account to see questions. They are available in the terms of reference. And maybe just also to say, if you are ready, if you are interested to submit the call for transfer networks, please read well the terms of reference together with the guide. They work together. If you only read the terms of reference, you will not understand the whole picture. And if you only read the guide, but okay, having the guide, then there are hyperlinks and connections to different fact sheets, terms of reference. So please read them together. And if you read them well, and if you read them 3 times, I think you will have already the understanding for application for phase 1. And actually what is written in the guide actually is sufficient for adequate application for phase 1. And then if you have any questions, please call the transfer, please contact us, the URBACT Secretariat, on the tn@urbact.eu website. And very useful for better understanding, there's lots of articles on URBACT website that are published and will be published in the future that can give you this more qualitative experience like we had today with our panelists. And I will finish with just repeating, coming back to these 2 balloons, one small balloon and the other big balloon. So now you should focus on phase 1 application and the process that needs to be done in phase 1, the development phase. And then after 6 months, there are 2 deadlines. in order to come to the actual transfer phase, in phase 2, where you will have the journey of transfer. So keep in mind 2 deadlines, first deadline, 10 January for phase 1, 6 months developing with the experts and consolidating the partnership and submitting then the phase 2 application where the transfer will happen. Okay, so this is all from my side. Okay. And then we can skip.
Do you want to leave? Should we leave that slide back up?
Yeah, I think it's
let's leave that slide there. You just stay where you are, Chris, please. We started a wee bit late, so let's maybe take 10 minutes or so to get some questions. You may have questions about what Chris has just talked about. You may have questions for some of our city colleagues earlier on. So let's take a few questions. We'll have a chance to carry on after the coffee break, obviously. So let's see some hands. Can we throw the catch box? Can you, again, just introduce yourself, please. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and your question, and then you can ping that nice, soft, fluffy microphone to someone else. So.
Hello, I'm Anne. I'm from Glasgow, but I'm here on behalf of the Spanish city of Tallinn. I'm a little confused about the transfer networks and the transfer cities and the good practice cities. You say they can only be involved in one. What if we have a situation that a city is a good practice for one subject, but is interested to join another network on a totally different subject?
Yeah, we said that if you're a good practice city on one subject, you can be a transfer city in another subject. It's possible.
Okay. Someone else stand up?
Excuse me, but only one, not the two?
Yeah, only one.
Only one. So you can lead one and you can be a transfer, you can be involved, it's a good practice to be involved in 2, but only following one and leading one.
Yeah, in total that's 2 networks.
You can lead one and you can be part of one.
Yeah.
So you can be in 2.
Yes.
Thank you. And I'm clear.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good morning, my name is Leonie Hulshoff. I'm from the city of Schiedam and we would like to be a lead partner in a transfer network. We've never been in URBACT before, so it's quite scary. Everyone says you first should be a partner and then you should become a lead partner, but that's not an option. So we are really thinking how is it going to happen. Do I understand it well that after phase 1 you can be denied for phase 2? That's question 1. So that it stops after phase 1 because you didn't manage something to accomplish. And about the preparations, I heard on the 4th of April you get the result of the application and you are supposed to start immediately. How? If we are not sure about the results, how can we prepare phase 2, waiting on these results of phase 1? And the last one, the money, always about the money. We are in a rich part of Europe, so we have 70% eligible costs. Does it mean that it's total 114,000 and 70% is 80,000, or is it 70% of the 80,000?
Okay, quite clear.
Thanks, Leonie. Yeah.
So
hang on to that, and then in a minute throw it to someone else. Chris?
First, exactly. The first phase 1 is incubator phase. It really gives you the opportunity to develop the project. You have 6 months to elaborate it, to find new partners, to make full partnership, and you have the expert support. So this is the phase 1. And the second question then was quite related. When you enter the phase 1, when we say, yeah, you are approved, we have a kick-off meeting in Paris together. That's the first thing we do. And we explain to you everything you need to know about, but you were afraid to ask before. And then, after 6 months, yes, there is this assessment again. If you fail, we don't want you to fail. We will do everything to help you to succeed in phase 2. Okay? And the third, that's the total amount. So co-finance rate 80%, 80,000, 70% of the 80,000 is your co-financing from ERDF. Okay.
Okay. Leonie, choose who you're going to throw that to.
Thank you. I'm Johanna from Munich, and I'm also thinking about becoming a lead expert or leading city. And I was just wondering about the schedule. Is this call the only chance for us as a good practice city for a transfer network, or do we have another chance in 1 year, for example?
I'm afraid this is the only chance now. URBACT program is like 6-year program. So we have 3 types of networks, and this is the only opportunity in URBACT 3 when we will have opportunity to submit the transfer network. Because then they last for 2.5 years, and it's half of the programming period.
Okay, so there may be other opportunities for action planning networks, but for transfer networks, this will be the only call in this programming period. Okay, another question? Okay, you want to?
Good morning, I'm Sam Hussain from Spain, representative in the monitoring committee. The URBACT monitoring committee. My question is about participation in this process. If it's key for the external assessment panel to take into account how the proposal is made. I mean, if the decision is made, let's say, by a civil servant and the mayor, or it is being as the fruit of a process of a participatory approach. So it is key to, from the first step, to involve the maximum number of bodies, mayor, institution, which is being to then the urban local group or something like that. Yeah? Is it clear? For the assessment panel.
I think, yeah, you have in application form for phase 1, you will already need to explain a bit the local situation. So if you explain that, yeah, you already have this and that, these kind of stakeholders, it's much better if you say, I don't know. So it's very important that the whole project is coherent and it fits well. And for each of the sections in the guide actually fits, can feed all the sections application form. So if you follow well the guide, the minimum requirements you can feed in application form. Yeah.
Okay. You live in URBACT is a very approachable program, and for those of you who are connected with URBACT for the first time, compared to some other programs, as Chris said, sending emails, following, they're very available. We are very keen to make sure that you have all of your questions answered. So I know there's lots of questions in the room. So Anselmo, could you hop that microphone over to someone else? There's a few other hands in the room going up.
Your choice.
Okay, I'm Francesca from Adelphi, Italy, and my question is it possible for a municipality to participate to transfer network as partner, only as partner?
Only one.
Only one?
Only one.
Okay, so the only opportunity for 2 transfer network is one as a partner at good practice and one as a partner.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, a few more hands.
Your choice.
Thank you. I'm Raffaella Gates from Bologna. The city of Bologna has 2 good practices, so we decide that one will be leader in a network, present as a leader in the network, and the other one as a partner in a network. I have 2 questions. In my case, we are the partner. We decide to apply as a partner in the network, and we are thinking to match 2 good practice in one network. The other city who lead the partner will take part of our good practice in there. And this is possible. Do you like it? This is very well. Okay, the first one. And the second one, in the first phase, we can involve a city out of good practice, or we have to choose first in the good practice. Thank you.
Okay, I think I understand. So, actually, if you want to involve good practice, another like you would be a good practice city, but being a transfer there. Yeah, this is possible, but because your role would be transferring the good practice from somewhere else. But of course, also transfer cities, they need to address the same policy challenge of the good practice. So some transfer cities, of course, they will have some practices already, existing practices, but not recognized by URBACT. And yours was recognized by URBACT, and in this sense, it's the same logic. You will be a transfer city, adapting some of the bits. Of course, you will also give, because you have some kind of practice, which is good, recognized by URBACT, but this is possible. And then, for phase one, your question, I mean, it's one good practice city and 2 transfer cities for phase one. If you elaborate well that you are already a good practice city, but it's a different, but you are a transfer city, your project just needs to be coherent. So it needs to be, you need to explain well why you are a transfer city here and how this is going to be, what is going to be transferred to your context. Of course, then you also explain what you can give. But it has to make sense, and that's the main thing. The project proposal needs to make sense. Do you want to add something, Eddie?
No, I think all I'd say is, some of these are quite detailed technical questions. All of us are around. We've also got Nuala, Sabina, Thierry, the whole team is here. Remember people wearing black lanyards are from the URBACT program, so we're not going to have time to fit in all these questions. I'm afraid I'm going to take a final question from over there and then we're going to wrap up. I think we all need a caffeine injection shortly, but so we will have a chance to carry this on. I've got a final word to say about this too before we close, but last question from Efren. Introduce yourself. I know who you are, but not everyone else does.
Yes, Efren Feliu, supporting the city of Bilbao for a good practice proposal. Details that I didn't catch. One is about funding for phase 2, and if that share of co-funding applies to the total, or which are the figures. Phase 1 is maximum 3 cities, so good practice plus 2 is not possible 1 plus 3 or something like that. Those were the 2 details. And the last important question, how many good practices transfer networks from phase 2 will pass to from phase 1 will pass to phase 2? So the 25 will remain?
Okay, so budget. 600,000 is the total budget of phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is 80,000. So this means that in phase 2, it remains 520,000. That's the first question. Second question was, what was the second question? This is the third question. More than, no. In initial proposal, you need to have 1 good practice and 2 transfer cities. That's it. And 25 networks will be approved, up to 25 networks will be approved for phase 1, and we hope that if 25 are approved in phase 1, that all of them go phase 2. We don't have any interest to go down.
Yeah. If I can just add to that before we wrap up, so, as Chris said, we want all 25 to continue, but it's true that at times after phase 1, we have pulled the plug on some projects because we've had fundamental concerns, but they really must be they're really quite fundamental concerns before we do that. We will give as much support as possible to all those projects because it's very resource intensive to get a network up and running. It's not in anyone's interest for those networks to carry on. So our hope is 25 will start, 25 will finish. That's the aspiration. Just one final thing before we break. We had to say no to 100 cities who wanted to come to this event who couldn't be here. So we're very conscious that there's a wider audience who's very interested in taking part in the transfer networks. We're a little bit worried that all the deals get carved up while we're in Tallinn, and cities who are unable to attend are kind of outside those discussions. So through social media, we can tell people what's happening. Please cast your net as wide as possible. We want this to be an open opportunity for all cities across Europe. So So by all means connect with people here, but don't forget there are people who aren't here who are super interested in being involved. Thanks for you.